What did Cleopatra actually look like? Let us get one thing out of the way. Cleopatra was not black, not even a little. It is quite impossible, and for more than one reason. It is nonsense, and harmful nonsense at that. But before we come to why, let us deal with what she actually looked like. Let us start with what we can see. There is a marble bust in the Altes Museum in Berlin, widely identified as Cleopatra VII. It shows a woman with a prominent aquiline nose, a strong brow, full lips, and a broad forehead. Her hair is drawn back in the Greek style in a bun with a royal diadem. Olive skin, dark hair. By modern standards, most people would find her beautiful. A striking Mediterranean face. But here is what is interesting. The Romans would not have agreed. The Roman and Greek ideal of beauty was fair skin and blonde hair. Think Marilyn Monroe. Think Grace Kelly. That was the look that turned heads in the ancient Mediterranean. Roman prostitutes dyed their hair blonde to attract customers. Ovid wrote poetry about pale-skinned, golden-haired women. If you were dark-haired and olive-skinned, you did not fit the template. Cleopatra did not fit the template. The coins tell a similar story. Cleopatra minted her own currency, and the profile on those coins is consistent with the Berlin bust. A strong, hooked nose, a pointed chin, not the soft, pale features the Romans idealized. And yet Caesar fell for her. Antony fell for her. The most powerful men in the world fell for a woman who did not match their culture's standard of beauty. That tells you something important about who Cleopatra was. She was also, by all accounts, a small woman. The ancient sources do not give us exact measurements, but the descriptions and the proportions in the statuary suggest a petite frame. This matters because when Cleopatra walked into a room, she did not dominate it physically. She dominated it with her voice, her wit, and her intelligence. Plutarch, who is our best source for her personality, says that her conversation had an irresistible charm. He says that the sound of her voice was like a many-stringed instrument. It's quite clear that her power over people came not from fitting the beauty standards of the age, but from her presence, her mind, her voice. So the real Cleopatra was a small, dark-haired, olive-skinned woman with a strong aquiline nose and a voice that could hold a room. She was not tall. She was not statuesque. She was not blonde. She looked nothing like Elizabeth Taylor. A modern audience would find her beautiful. The Romans found her irresistible, which is not the same thing and is arguably more impressive. Now, her ancestry. Cleopatra's family was Macedonian Greek. She was a descendant of Ptolemy I, one of Alexander the Great's generals who declared himself Pharaoh of Egypt after Alexander's death. For 3 centuries, the Ptolemaic dynasty made Egypt part of the Greek-speaking world. Their capital, Alexandria, was a Greek city founded by a Greek. The clue is in the name. They competed with other cities across the eastern Mediterranean to make themselves the centre of the Hellenistic world. And they succeeded. By Cleopatra's time, Alexandria, with its vast library and museum, was the centre of the Greek-speaking world. Not Athens. Alexandria. There is no modern equivalent. Imagine Silicon Valley, Hollywood and Wall Street rolled into one and physically located in the same place. That was Alexandria. Although the Ptolemies paid lip service to the old Egyptian culture, it was largely for show. Official documents had to be translated from Egyptian into Greek, so that the bureaucrats who ran the palace could read them. Alexandria was cosmopolitan, but Greek culture and language were the glue that held everything together. Historians believe that Cleopatra was the first member of her family to speak Egyptian. That tells you everything about how Greek this dynasty was. Now, to keep the bloodline pure, to maintain the myth that they were descended from the gods and to keep out foreign political influence, the Ptolemies practiced incest. Brother married sister. Uncle married niece. Father married daughter. Cleopatra married her own brother. Her father and mother were brother and sister. But here is the thing. The Ptolemaic dynasty lasted almost 300 years. If they really had been interbreeding that aggressively for that long, they should have been genetic catastrophes by the third or fourth generation. They should have been riddled with deformities, cognitive deficits, and infertility. Think of the later Habsburgs. Charles II of Spain could barely chew his own food. The Ptolemies were nothing like that. Cleopatra is described by the ancient sources as witty, charming, furiously intelligent, and physically attractive. Similar descriptions exist for other members of the dynasty going back generations. These were not the products of 3 centuries of aggressive inbreeding. So what was going on? The most likely explanation is that the Ptolemaic incestuous marriages were, at least in part, performance. Political theatre. The official marriages were real enough on paper, but the actual biological reproduction was happening with concubines, lovers, and political allies outside those marriages. The offspring of these affairs were then presented as the children of the sibling unions. There is circumstantial evidence for this. One Ptolemy had his infant son killed and his head sent to his sister wife as an act of spite. His actions make far more sense if he believed the child was not his, but the son of his wife's lover. The Ptolemies famously hated each other. They had a special genius for dispatching one another in creative and humiliating ways. People with that level of mutual contempt tend not to want to sleep together. But even if the incest was largely theatrical, the Ptolemies still needed to maintain the pretense. And that meant the bloodline had to look plausible. It would be difficult to convince anybody that Ptolemy VI was really the son of Ptolemy V if his biological father looked like Omar Sa'i and not like Omar Sharif. In other words, whoever the Ptolemies were secretly having children with, those partners had to look broadly similar. Mediterranean, olive-skinned, dark-haired, plausible. Which brings us to what Cleopatra was not. Cleopatra was not black. She was not of sub-Saharan African descent. She was not African-American. She was Macedonian Greek by culture, and, with high probability, a mix of Greek and Egyptian by blood. DNA testing has shown that even though they now speak Arabic, the peoples of North Africa, including Egypt, are genetically essentially the same populations that lived there in antiquity. The Ptolemies were in Egypt for almost 300 years. They certainly had sexual relationships with Egyptians and produced children with them. Cleopatra was not a genetic dead end of 3 centuries of sibling marriage. She was culturally Greek, but ethnically, in all likelihood, partly or mostly Egyptian. She looked like a modern Egyptian woman, with a strong nose. And that is the real problem with claiming Cleopatra was black. It does not just get the history wrong, it erases her actual ethnic identity, which was Mediterranean and Egyptian. No wonder the Egyptians objected when Netflix cast a mixed-race actress, and had talking heads claim that their grandmothers had told them Cleopatra was black. Your grandmother was wrong, Netflix. And here is what makes the claim actively harmful, not just inaccurate. If you make Cleopatra black, you can build a very ugly narrative from the historical events. A black queen sleeps with powerful Roman men to stop them from conquering her country, but ultimately fails when another Roman, Octavian, conquers it anyway. That is not empowering. That is degrading. And it is not what happened because Cleopatra was not black. The same problem applies to Hannibal of Carthage. If you claim he was black, which he was not, he was Phoenician, then his story becomes one of a black general defeated by a white one. Scipio Africanus. That is not inspiring. That's a story of defeat imposed on people who have no connection to it. It is worth noting that race as we understand it did not exist in the ancient world. If you read the ancient writers, Plutarch, Virgil, Homer, Cassius Dio, Tacitus, they never once refer to people as white, black, brown, or yellow. People were either civilized or they were not. To both the Greeks and the Romans, civilized people spoke Greek. Everyone else was a barbarian from the sound they made. Bar, bar, bar. The Romans had prejudices, certainly. There is plenty of evidence that they looked down on the blonde and red-haired peoples to the north, who lived in wooden huts and did not have public baths or paved roads. But the dividing line was culture, not colour. To the Romans, Cleopatra spoke Greek and Latin. She was civilized. For that matter, the great English queen Elizabeth I, who lived centuries later, also spoke Greek and Latin. If Caesar or Cleopatra had met her, they would have regarded her as civilized, despite her red hair and pale skin. Two queens, separated by 16 centuries, united by a shared language and a shared understanding of power. But that is another story. Cleopatra was a small, sharp-faced, Greek-speaking Egyptian woman with an aquiline nose and a voice that could stop a room. She wasn't tall. She was not conventionally beautiful. She was not black. She was not white. She was Cleopatra. And that was more than enough.
I am eternal.
Subscribe to find out what happens when Cleopatra and Elizabeth I actually meet.